The day I graduated was really quite exciting for me. I finally felt this was finished, and now I could do what I'd wanted to do since the time I was about 7 years old. So I had the official piece of paper in my hand, and it was a wonderful feeling.
She just epitomized for me what nursing is all about, going beyond the call of duty to do something for someone who otherwise would have no one with them. And so every time I think of nursing and think about why I'm here, it's Gita Proudman that I think of.
It gives me great honor, and it is indeed a privilege to introduce a young woman to you who, to me, has become a symbol of what ONA is.
On June 12th of 1998, I went in for a regular 8-hour night shift in the labor and delivery department, and I didn't know it at the time, but that shift would change my life forever, quite dramatically. The baby that died, I had thankfully, prior to that, never seen an infant who looked like him, and don't really need to see it again. He had massive deformities, facial deformities. He had, where his mouth was supposed to be, was basically a hole in his face, and his nose was displaced, his eyes were displaced, his brain was for the most part outside his skull. And he was dying, and he was being left alone to die. And it was very busy, and people didn't have time to spend time with him, and I knew that he was going to, in all likelihood, die, and no one would realize it for an hour because they would have checked on him, he would have been breathing, and then he would stop and no one would know for the longest time. And that was him in a nutshell. He was a dying, deformed infant that nobody wanted to look at. But because the nursery was so busy, he wasn't getting much comforting. The mother, I had been told, had said her goodbyes at Sick Kids and was not going to be coming in. And I was also told that this baby was not expected to survive our shift. I just thought that the child deserved some human contact before he died. And what the history I had been given, he hadn't had any. I found out later that wasn't exactly true, but that was what prompted me to pick him up. I decided that when I had the opportunity to take a break, I was going to use it to hold him. I was able to take a break about 40 minutes later, and I asked permission from the nurse who was covering the nursery at the time if I could, and she said absolutely, it's a good idea, no one has the time to hold him, so, by all means. And she suggested I take him into the doctor's sleep room, which was away from other mothers and away from the nursery, and gave some dignity to the baby. And I sat with him in that room it was approximately an hour, and during the last 15 minutes he really started to slow down, and his breathing slowed dramatically, and finally it stopped. And I did not, because he had a do not resuscitate order, I did nothing. I waited a few minutes and I checked his chest and he was gone. During the time I was holding him, I would sing to him a little bit and talk to him a bit and just let him know somebody was there. And again, I don't know how much difference it made to him. I hope it made some difference. After he passed away, I went and got his nurse who had returned from her break, and we checked him together, and then she called the emergency physician, and I went back to work. And I told the other staff who were around, who were interested, that he had passed away, and they all told me that they had thought I had done a good thing by holding him. And then I ran into another nurse in the hallway, very briefly, about 30-second conversation that I don't remember word for word. But I did tell her that he had died peacefully in my arms, and I'd felt I'd helped him. And she didn't say anything strange. She simply said something like, "Oh, good," or "That's good, I'm glad," or whatever. And we went back to work and saw each other quite a few times the rest of the morning, and she never said a word to me that indicated she had had a problem with something I'd said. From there, I went home and went to bed. It had been a stressful night for me, and I knew I had to go back to work later that afternoon. After I got up, I went out to run some errands, and when I came back, standing in my lobby were the manager from our other side of the hospital, who had at one time been my manager, but she had moved to the other site, and a woman that I didn't recognize. I assumed they were there to see somebody else. I didn't know why, but I just assumed that. So I said hello and continued into the building, and was very surprised that they followed me in. And the manager said to me, "Gita, we'd like to talk to you about the death of the baby." Now, I was still extremely naive, and I thought, oh, somebody said that I was upset, and they're just checking up on me, and they're just, you know, doing some nice follow-up, because they're so concerned about me. Little did I know that that was not the case. I invited them into my apartment, and we sat down, and they asked me to tell them what had happened, so I did, and they wouldn't look at me. They kept looking back and forth at each other, and finally I said, what is going on here? There's something you're not telling me. And they danced around it and wouldn't answer, and finally one said, well, a concern has been raised that foul play was involved in this baby's death. Now, I nearly slid off my chair and hit the floor at that point, because I couldn't believe that this was happening. I thought, okay, I said, there's some kind of mistake here. I don't know what has happened or what's been said, or, you know. And they said, well, you know, one of the nurses raised a concern. Do you remember what you might have said to anybody? Do you remember your conversations? I said, how would I don't remember what I said. Then they proceeded to tell me that I was suspended, and that they would conduct a very thorough internal investigation prior to calling the coroner. And that they would wait with me until my husband came home, because I was so distressed. And I said, no, I'd really rather that you go and conduct your investigation, speak to the other staff who were on, because they'll tell you that they checked on me and everything was fine, and we can put this to rest. Well, they either talked really fast or didn't talk to anybody at all, which I know the latter is the case, because 45 minutes later I got a call saying that the coroner was now involved. The police came on the Monday. The baby died on a Friday. They came over on a Monday and asked if they could, you know, talk to me. I said absolutely. And I talked to them for an hour and a half, and it wasn't, I mean, they made me go through it 4 or 5 times, but it wasn't antagonistic, it wasn't threatening. So when they said, if we have any more questions, can we call you? I said, sure.